For the first time in history, Apple has surpassed Samsung to become the leader in mobile phone sales. Apple sold 234.6 million devices, while Samsung sold 226.6 million. Although this may be seen as a positive achievement, it says a lot about Apple today, a company very concerned with numbers, sales, and profits, and for many, a company that's a pale shadow of Steve Jobs' Apple. When the iPhone 15 was launched in September of 2023, news about Apple's lack of innovation emerged, along with statements like "innovation died with Steve Jobs." After years of releases that seem like mere updates and questionable decisions, it's time to ask, can Apple without Steve Jobs still surprise us, or have they traded their soul for profits? Has Apple reached the limit of innovation? To understand this, we first need to know how Apple earned its reputation for innovation. Jobs' vision was that one day everyone could have a computer at home that was easy to use and could perform a wide variety of tasks. With this in mind, Jobs and Wozniak worked on the Apple I, Apple's first personal computer. Despite its almost artisanal design and not being a sales success, the Apple I served as a prototype for what would become Apple's first true personal computer. Until then, various modifications were necessary, but the concept had been established, and perhaps that was the most important part. Several improvements, made over several years, were responsible for cementing what would become the personal computer. Among them, one that stands out is the graphical interface. Apple was the first company to include a graphical interface in its personal computers. However, the original idea was not Apple's. In 1979, Jobs and his team made a visit to Xerox. During this visit, the delegation was introduced to a demonstration of the Alto, a personal computer that Xerox researchers had developed. And the main feature of the Alto was precisely the graphical interface. At the time, the dominant way to interact with computers was through command line interface, meaning the computer screen did not display icons, windows, or menus, but rather lines of code. And the only way to make the computer perform a function was by typing commands through the keyboard. The Alto was quite different. The screen displayed a graphical interface, that is, graphics that showed icons, navigation menus, windows, and a cursor, allowing the user to use a mouse and simply clicking on the tools they wanted to use, without having to memorize huge commands. Jobs immediately understood that all computers should work that way, and he couldn't understand why Xerox had not yet released this innovation to the public, so he decided that he himself would do it at Apple. This is how the Apple Lisa was developed, the first commercial marketed personal computer that offered a graphical user interface to the user, an infinitely more intuitive and practical way to use the computer. The Lisa was revolutionary, and it was one of the necessary steps for your smartphone or computer to display those nice icons today. Years later, in 1984, Apple officially announced the launch of its first Macintosh. Since then, all the personal computers that followed were, in one way or another, a version of Apple's first computers. This is because Apple was the first company to truly manage to build a device that combined portability and intuitiveness, something then unknown to the general public, and so its PC was widely adopted by everyone. Steve Jobs could see the future right in front of him, and it seemed only a matter of time before his visionary ideas took over the world, and that's exactly what happened, but not without a terrible surprise along the way. The following year, Jobs was fired from the company he helped build. The reason? A prolonged deadlock with the board of directors and then CEO of the company, John Sculley. Sculley had been hired by Jobs a few years early after a successful career as president and vice president of PepsiCo. After being dismissed, Jobs found a startup called Next, continuing to develop his ideas for personal computers. But without Jobs' guiding Apple's vision, the company soon lost focus and began to experience a series of failed launches, such as the Newton MessagePad, a personal assistant device. Steve Jobs was brought back to Apple by a desperate management when Apple decided to buy Jobs' startup for nearly $500 million in 1997. The same year, Jobs convinced the board of directors to make him the CEO. The return of the visionary provided a true turnaround for the company, and Apple quickly returned to being synonymous with innovation. Under his leadership, Apple launched the iMac in 1998, the brand's first all-in-one computer, which remains one of the company's main products to this day. The success of the iMac solidified Jobs' position as CEO. A few years later, in 2001, another absolute success for Apple, the iPod, introducing a new portable way to listen to music at a time when MP3s were still popularizing and Discman and Walkman were still common. The iPod sold over 400 million units and was launched simultaneously with iTunes, Apple's digital music store, when Steve Jobs realized that the MP3 devices already on the market were crap, according to him. When any new product went through Jobs' feedback, assessments like "it's crap" or "it's shit" were very common. He always sought the highest possible standard of quality, regardless of his colleagues' and employees' feelings. This is how Apple continued to be a brand recognized for the reliability and quality of its products, always at the forefront of technological innovations. This characteristic was reinforced once again with the launch of the iPhone in 2007, which was a milestone not only in the cell phone industry but also how the modern world operates. No, the iPhone was not the world's first smartphone. In fact, since '94, devices that would fit the concept of a smartphone, like the IBM Simon, were being developed. But it was Steve Jobs' iPhone that made the smartphone something everyone wanted to have. The iPhone introduced a series of innovations, such as a completely new graphical interface, functionalities of an iPod incorporated, a virtual keyboard instead of a physical one, and a multi-touch screen with incredible sensitivity and performance for a time when many touchscreen devices still required a stylus. All this technology packed into a single device was the turning point in the timeline of cell phones. At the time of the iPhone's launch, Android was already being developed, but they still intended to make a phone in the style of BlackBerry. This changed when they saw Jobs' new product, which immediately made the original Android project obsolete, and the Android team essentially started the project from scratch to incorporate many ideas from the iPhone. This was the degree of innovation that the introduction of the iPhone provided, up to Apple's reputation as a company from which one could expect advanced technology. A feat that would be repeated in 2007 with the launch of the iPad, another revolutionary device that would do for the tablet market what the iPhone did for the smartphone market. That is, introduce people to a new way of interacting with the digital world. Unfortunately, the trajectory of Apple's genius was cut far too short. Steve Jobs spent much of the 2000s fighting against a rare type of pancreatic cancer, which was identified back in 2004. By the end of the decade, it became apparent that Jobs' body was fighting against something severe, as he appeared increasingly frail in his public appearances. Nevertheless, Steve Jobs continued to lead Apple with his usual genius until, in early 2011, he had to step away from work to take care of his health, eventually resigning as CEO of the company in August of that year. A few months later, at 56, Steve Jobs lost his battle with cancer, and the world lost one of the greatest names in technology history. The moment of mourning for technology enthusiasts also meant a moment of immense challenge for Apple, which for the first time since '97 would have to manage without Jobs' mind to help. The task of keeping Apple at the top fell into the lap of one of Steve's closest executives, Chief Operating Officer Tim Cook, who now needed to prove that Apple would still be synonymous with innovation. He was under tremendous pressure to continue Jobs' legacy from the start, and the question on everyone's mind was, could Tim Cook fill the void left by Jobs? In business terms, there could not have been a better choice than Tim Cook to take the reins of Apple and continue Steve Jobs' legacy. After all, it was under his leadership that the brand vastly expanded its business and became the first company to reach a market value of $1 trillion in 2018. Since then, it has tripled its value and has remained the most valuable company in the world. But in terms of innovation, the truth is that the brand may not convey the same thing as before, and for a long time it seems not to carry the magic of innovation that came over with each new release. The iPhone, for example, Apple's flagship with more than 234 million units sold in 2023, does not seem to have undergone any significant changes in recent years, something that did not happen in the early years of the line. Moreover, some of the few changes that have occurred sometimes end up not being so well received. Such was the case with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. At its launch, Apple made a point of highlighting that the cell phone's structure contains titanium in its composition, supposedly making it the most robust iPhone ever made. However, when tech content creators got their hands on the model, they saw that things were not quite like that. Using only their hands, it is possible to bend the device enough to break the rear glass, something strange to happen with the most robust iPhone ever made. Another point to observe is that under the command of Tim Cook, iPhones began to have several models per launch. This not only made the names become a huge confusion, but also created scenarios that Jobs' Apple did not provide. In the iPhone's release while Jobs was alive, there were technical differences in design and functionality. With each iPhone, a need was met that the market didn't even know it had. Buying a new iPhone meant something truly new. The buyer could be sure they were purchasing a device with the best of Apple, which was a characteristic of their products. This is no longer true. Today, you might be buying old technology even if you purchased a new iPhone at its launch. For example, the current iPhone generation at the time this video was made is the iPhone 15. Despite this, people that buy a regular iPhone 15 are not taking home the best that Apple has to offer, as several important new features are in fact the same already present in previous year's iPhone 14 Pro. This doesn't mean that the new iPhone is a bad phone or anything like that, but it certainly doesn't help maintain the idea of innovative premium product and cutting-edge technology that the first iPhones brought, and certainly does not leave the brand's fans very satisfied. As if that wasn't enough, in recent years Apple has taken some measures that are not very interesting from the consumer's perspective, such as removing the headphone jack from devices, something that was standard in the industry and provided convenience and compatibility of the device with any headphones you owned. Instead, now you would have to use a specific Apple headphone, much more expensive than others, or switch to wireless headphones, like the brand's own AirPods, obviously even more expensive. In later iPhones, Apple added insult to injury by removing the factory headphones from the iPhone box, leaving everyone somewhat annoyed. But of course, they didn't stop there. At the same time they removed the headphones, they decided to take out the chargers too. All this, added to the fact that iPhone prices only increase every year, means that now you pay a lot of money to have an Apple cell phone, but you don't even receive headphones and charger in the box. The company's excuse for these changes is that it's an attempt to make the process more ecologically correct, but not everyone believed in this. Just over a year after adopting this measure, it was estimated that Apple had already saved about $6.5 billion with it. Regarding Tim Cook, many do believe Apple has been lacking innovation. It is clear that creating revolutionary products is not easy, and it doesn't happen every day. But essentially, the only products close to innovative that Apple has launched since Jobs' death were the Apple Watch and AirPods, and these weren't as impactful as the iPhone, iPad, or iPod. And to be honest, I don't want to talk about the Apple Vision Pro. To me, it seems like a niche product, and it certainly doesn't bring the same spirit of innovation as the other devices. For this reason, some users have claimed that innovation died with Steve Jobs. Whether you agree or not, today's Apple is much more similar to other companies than it was in the past, and the magic that surrounded each innovative product launched by Steve Jobs seemed to have disappeared amid the pursuit of maximum profit. Every company needs profit to survive, and certainly Jobs thought so too, but it seems that with him it wasn't so evident, or it seemed that they put a bit more effort into the consumer experience, not focusing just on the numbers. The big question is it necessary to release a new iPhone every year? For Apple, the answer is yes, but is there enough innovation for that? And more, do consumers need to switch devices every year? For these questions, the answer is no. This is because Apple has significantly changed its business model, and these strategies make sense for it today. Apple today is a services company, not just a products company. The big difference between Apple and any other company that sells Android smartphones like Samsung, for example, is that Apple controls the entire ecosystem. Selling a phone is basically where Samsung stops making money from a consumer, and exactly where Apple begins. This is because sales made within an Android use Google's App Store, so Google makes money on app sales, not Samsung. Because of iOS, Apple has its own App Store, the App Store, and any sale that occurs there pays a commission to Apple. And it doesn't stop there. If you buy anything within an app downloaded from the App Store or Play Store, you will pay a commission to Apple or Google, which reaches up to 30%. Furthermore, Apple also has its own services like Apple Music, Apple TV, iCloud, and others. So besides making money on the sale of the smartphone, Apple makes a lot of money by keeping the consumer. According to a fiscal year 2023 performance analysis by Forrester, Apple sold the equivalent of $298 billion in products and $85 billion in services. Products represented 78% of sales, while services 22%. Interestingly, product sales fell 6% year over year, while service sales grew 9% year over year. But what is even more interesting is that the gross profit margin for products was 37%, while for services it reached 71%. This makes it clear that for Apple, keeping the consumer in its ecosystem is more important than selling a new device. This can be proven by the company's own claim that iPhones last twice as long as competitors with an average lifespan of 46 months compared to 23 months for Androids. And also that Apple continues updating its smartphones for up to 6 years. In 2021, Samsung had committed to doubling its smartphone updates from 2 to 4 years. In this way, Apple does not need to innovate with every launch. In fact, it is likely they don't even want to. The cost to develop innovative products is much higher than simply updating and improving the previous version. Thus, the customer who bought last year's version does not feel pressured to buy the new release and keeps their smartphone for something between 2 to 3 years. They remain in the Apple ecosystem, continue subscribing to Apple services, and generate revenue through the company's other services, where the company has a higher profit margin. From this perspective, it's much more interesting for them to increase their user base than to increase revenue per product. The result is that the innovative side with the spectacular launches of the early iPhones has given way to less innovation, but consistency and regularity of release, as they do this every year. And as it becomes increasingly positioned as a services company, Apple values its share even more, since the market tends to value service companies at a higher multiple than hardware companies. Now tell me, do you think Apple has really reached its technological ceiling? Or does the company's change in strategy make more sense for them to maintain a higher frequency of launches? Leave a comment below. Now, to understand about the fall of Airbnb with lodges that you can be spied on with hidden cameras and how the company didn't kill the hotel industry, click on this video that's on screen right now. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. That's it for this video. Bye bye!